Okay, we'll get started. So we've got a few people joining online as well. Hello, everyone online. Today we have Nicky Moffat from the Queensland Conservation Council. So Nicky, I read, was a former journalist from the Sunshine Coast, but she's worked in private forestry and agroforestry and also has experience in tertiary teaching as well. And obviously working in conservation at the moment. I'm not sure what Nicky's going to talk to us about today, but I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. And I'll pass over to her now. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Hara. I'm Nicky, or Nick to my mates. Lovely to be here, and I'll be talking with you guys about Queensland's forests because we think we have a pretty cool way to get much better protection. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that we're on stolen land. Queensland Conservation Council acknowledges, that we meet and work across many lands of Queensland, and we want to respect our elders and pay our respects to past and present leaders, and acknowledge the importance that all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play in protecting, conserving and sustaining Queensland. I'm on Gubbi Gubbi land, and I sit quite close to Yinnaburra and Waka Waka territory. And I have in the past as well worked quite closely with the Bachelor, and so just extending my personal thanks to all of their amazing community, and to say that we support and we're allies in their fight as well. I'm going to talk to you about protecting forests the Queensland way. We'll go through a bit about, I just want to introduce Queensland Conservation Council. I'll explain a new campaign that we have called Protect Beautiful Queensland. We'll talk a bit about the threats and opportunities facing our native forests, which I'm sure are not new to all of you. And I think what you might be most interested in is how we're approaching the campaign. And this, has been developing over the last couple of years and starting to get some really cool wins. And then I just want to leave plenty of time to discuss the knowledge gaps that we have and how I think research and advocacy could work so much more closely, and some of the ideas I have for collaboration. But first, a little bit about me. Now, something I don't really put in my bio is that I was arrested several times when I was from about the age of 16 to 21. I worked in a volunteer capacity as a forest campaigner in East Gippsland in Victoria. And that's me abseiling. We did a lot of building tree sits and cabling ourselves to things. And I tied my bike locked my neck to a wood chip mill and stopped trucks for many hours. And so you can sort of see that forests are in my blood. I've loved them forever. I went camping as a youngster. Some of my fondest memories are liloing down rivers in the middle of the Snowy River National Park. And when I first saw a forest that had been logged, that was being logged, and I had to drive through a whole bunch of really young forest to get to it, I suddenly realized, that we have this choice in our lives, that we can make a real difference, that we can make a legacy, and that there is a huge difference between the different landscapes, depending on how we treat them. And I desperately wanted to help treat them well. I worked on that campaign for many years. Thousands of people did, and we actually saved that forest. And I think it just lit this fire in me that, there's hope. We can actually make change. We live in a place where democracy is very healthy, actually. In many parts of the world, it's impossible to save forests as easily as we can. So that passion it lives with me today, and I hope I share a bit of it with you as well. Queensland Conservation Council is an awesome organisation. I've been with them for 3 years now. They've been around for more than 50 years, and they've got 50 member groups. We work really closely with regional conservation councils, and we, I guess, play a role in bringing people together, as well as advocating from the city and the Southeast Queensland political power base, I guess, of the left-leaning community. We try and make the issues facing all of regional Queensland real to decision makers here in the big smoke. QCC, we advocate, we have public campaigns, we do a lot of relational work with departments and decision makers and people they listen to. We also have a lot of fun. We build community. We turn up for our allies, whether they be unions or churches or First Nations groups, or smaller environment groups or people we've never met before that have great ideas. We really try and connect people and provide a platform for people to celebrate and defend nature. And we do big rallies. We try and demonstrate that support as often as we can. And we also, position ourselves with our work with the government as being a trusted voice where evidence is really important. And so the research that comes out of the CBCS and UQ and other academic institutions is super important to our work. We rely on it really heavily. We also rely on all our academic friends to keep us up to speed with the latest research on biodiversity conservation. A couple of years ago, we realised that despite there being sort of popular support, we felt there was popular support for nature conservation in Queensland, it seemed that protected area growth was really happening at a snail's pace. We did some analyses that found that if it continued at the rate it was going, it'd take 1,000 years to reach the government's then target of doubling our protected areas, so our national parks and conservation parks and private land nature refuges, things like that, doubling those by 2030. And so we thought, well, what are we going to, we need to sort of broaden this so that's not just us, it's clear that it's actually a broad community of people behind this. We partnered with Outdoors Queensland, Pew and QCC, so the Pew Charitable Trust is a key partner in this campaign, but we brought in people that love nature, they're out in nature, but they're not necessarily politically active, and they don't necessarily know that there's a problem with the way that we're going about our industries and our use of nature at the moment. So we formed this alliance called Protect Beautiful Queensland, and it really is a movement for the people, but it's backed by some really great statewide organisations, including Outdoors Queensland and the National Parks Association, and it has quite a lot of support from the Indigenous community as well, including Balcanoe Cape York Development Corporation, which has been very involved in the Cape York handbacks in the north of the state. Our vision is to double Queensland's protected areas by 2030, and in well-managed parks, private protected areas and Indigenous protected areas with inclusive, collaborative and well-funded management. We want to live in a state with a world-leading protected area network that meets state, national and international targets, where First Nations leadership is facilitated and the rich and living cultural heritage is celebrated, and where active management of national parks and private protected areas is prioritised and well-funded, and this is the key thing that we are fighting for, so that landscapes are healthy, resilient, and where wildlife thrives across the state's many ecosystems. We launched with a survey. We did a poll, an independent poll that we commissioned, and it found that 77% of Queenslanders want more national parks. Many of these places are forests, so bear with me, the link to forests is coming. Some really fabulous information here, like across political divides, which isn't in this slide, but across political divides, people love nature, and regardless of who they vote for, people want more national parks. 64% of Queenslanders have visited a national park in Queensland in the last 12 months. Nearly half the people, 43% of people are more likely to vote for a party that promises to double national parks. This is pretty powerful data, and we found that there was a lot of interest when we did shop this around to decision makers. So why is it that so many of our landscapes are unprotected, knowing that there is such support? And I think it does come down to people needing to relate it to the human, our use of those landscapes. And so when we look at native forests, if we just take this as a case study, 51 million hectares, we actually have the largest native forest estate of any state or territory in Australia, and the smallest amount of that is protected. 5% is national park, and statewide the total of protected areas lags across all ecosystems. I'm sure you all know lags far behind other states. It's less than 9%. So we're pushing for that to be at least doubled. And the threats that are facing our forests include deforestation. As we know, it's a hotspot here, unfortunately, and 80% of land clearing is for beef production. Logging, which is a real focus of ours at the moment, is in 28 million hectares of state-owned forests. Only 3 million of those is actually known, but the state government is currently, that's the state forests, the state government is currently planning to log all of its state-owned leasehold land as well. And there's about a further 10 million hectares of native forest on private land that has commercial interests, like commercially good species. Our forests are really important as climate change continues to affect our natural ecosystems, and there's a need for refugia. So when we look at what the current government is doing, it's very blinkered in its view of these forests, and it's really clear that timber is the only value that's really being assessed. So we've been campaigning to turn that around, including, as you can see on the slide, some radio interviews that I've done with Steve Austin, who's not always the kindest of presenters, but it was a fantastic interview. And it's what I just love about talking about forests, is that people immediately get behind the campaigns, because if you're faced with a choice between timber coming from a plantation or a sustainably sourced place compared to greater glider habitat, it's kind of a no-brainer. And the wildlife that's supported in these forests is extraordinary, and so unique to Queensland as well. So what we did is a few months ago now, sort of mid to late last year, we decided that we would bring together some different folks who love forests but probably aren't out there blockading, and that's not really the Queensland way to do things. We like to be polite, and we like to work with regional communities on solutions. So we went and met some horse riders who want to use some of the forests that are, and some of them already do ride right through all these state forests, and they would love to see better trails and signage and environmental education. They became key partners with us in a campaign that we launched just around southeast Queensland's forests. It was so fun going out into the bush and meeting all these horses and these beautiful people. And we also spoke to a lot of other active outdoor users of forests in this campaign, Forest for Everyone. But the key push was that in the government's timber plan, we wanted them to acknowledge that actually there's a role for conservation. It plays a really important role in regional communities who don't have access to a lot of things for their young people to do, who need active recreation options. And so we kind of built that case that this, we obviously come from, as a conservation council, we come from the protected areas campaigning we do from a place of wanting to stand up for nature, that nature actually needs its own areas to thrive. But actually there are so many benefits. When you protect a national park, there's economic benefits. People go there just to experience that extraordinary place. People go there to learn about First Nations culture. We could be doing so much more of that. Sharing First Nations values and knowledge about how to care for country and how to see your own place in the world. There's so much we could learn. So we found that when we went into regional areas and sort of lifted up the locals' stories, that just cut straight to the heart with Minister Powell, and we got a win. I don't want to take credit for this campaign. The SEQ Forest campaign has been decades in the making, and there's a forest agreement that said that these forests would not be logged, but it was very much looking like they were just going to be thrown in with all of the Queensland forests as soon as the LNP got in. That it was very much looking like they were going to be logged again, even though they've been degraded so badly over the last 100 years. And we won. So the final timber plan came out, and there was an exclusion around logging, and so it committed that there'd be no reintroduction of native timber harvesting from state-owned native forests. This really was a great outcome. I agree with Minister Powell, and I was thrilled that he mentioned the outdoor sector and tourism and conservation, and then we met with him later and just confirmed that those areas are going to be preserved as conservation park and national park, and they are. So I think that, you know, what we take from this is that when we step outside of our own comfort zone and away from the scientists who understand the significance and you know, can talk our language, and we go and listen to how other people see these forests, and we explain to them, because often they don't know the situation around biodiversity, the biodiversity crisis. They don't know that half the species in there might not exist in 50 or 100 years, and that the situation's urgent. That when we do that, we actually can create lasting change, and we manage to transcend any of the stereotypes, you know, that can hold back really good policy. The way to do that is through stories and human-focused narrative. That's my journalism side coming out. I did spend many years studying what people will click on. And it's the people. It's the people in the frame. They have to be in the frame. And the power of working with allies who you don't know are your friends until you go and ask and you go and talk to them. So we've made friends with people in tourism, all sorts of outdoors fields, which I'll get to in a moment. And they're very powerful because, they really help us make the case. And often they make the case better than we could. An example of another little spin-off campaign I just wanted to share with you because I love it so much. We have all these amazing active outdoors users who are coming behind the Protect Beautiful Queensland campaign, and they're just sharing their stories. So, you know, we learned from the Forest from Everyone win, and we're starting to really grow a huge supporter base of people who are all quite well known in their own communities. These people in these slides all run their own businesses, and they're businesses that rely on nature, and oftentimes they rely on national parks and other protected areas. Alana Bold runs All About Paddling, and she says we need to protect more of these wilderness spaces or they'll be gone. And she actually wrote a big blog that we're going to publish soon as well, all about her history and why she's so passionate about nature. Sam Stedman, he runs outdoor trail runs all up in North Queensland. Tens of thousands of people go to these events, and he's just so passionate about getting more resources for rangers and for national parks that he uses for his events. He loves outdoor lifestyle, true Queenslander. And Teresa from Horizon Guides, she takes people bushwalking on these amazing experiences. And she says, you know, nature isn't somewhere you go, it's something you're part of. I think like when just cutting, you can feel it, can't you? Like you can't disagree with that. So we have seen a lot of support. We went to a festival recently, the Woodford Folk Festival. We were there for the whole time until like 10 o'clock every night in our stall. We saw so many people and they all had great stories and they shared them with us. We offered a free, if you give us a video, we'll give you a free t-shirt. And we launched this little campaign called Love Adventure, Respect Nature. And it's all about, you know, taking action. You love it, you get out there, you enjoy it. So let's take action and let's get more national parks. Let's connect up these little islands together. Let's have a thriving landscape that's there for our kids and their kids and for everyone. So anyone in the audience wants a free tea, get in touch. So thank you very much. I know that we're coming to the bit where we get to say that Queensland Conservation Council is a big supporter of the CBCS. We think your solutions focus is fantastic. We love working with diverse folk as well across you know, the discipline divides. I've, you know, got a degree in forestry, but I'm a mad keen conservationist. So I've studied journalism as well, but, you know, they all come together. And I think the more we work with people who are experts, the more powerful we are and the more influence we can have. I think there's many research and collaboration opportunities, and I just have a couple of ideas that I want to plant the seeds for or get your thoughts on. So one of the things that we come up against constantly in forest campaigning is, and in the, you know, the protected area space, is that there's all this misunderstanding around what good wood production is. I know that what we're doing in Queensland is really flawed. I've personally gone out and found with citizen scientist friends, been on spotlighting and found greater gliders in trees that are earmarked for logging. And when I've raised this with the forestry department, they've said, yeah, no, that's fine. That's just what we do. That's good. It's all good. We've been logging there for 80 years. So what we're doing is robust, and that's probably why they're there. Now, when I look at the forest, I can see that it's been completely degraded, and the tiny little strip where we're finding the greater gliders is actually old trees that have been left and not logged for all that time because they've got hollows in them. That's what greater gliders need. It hasn't been logged for all that time because it's actually a council managed scenic reserve. But the forestry department's convinced the council that they will log it. Long story, but we really need to demonstrate that what we're doing in Queensland is really behind the eight ball when it comes to sustainability and how you view any sector, but my passion is forestry. So some sort of a comparative analysis that just shows, the difference in the codes of practice or the sustainability measures in the ways, in the frameworks that different states and territories have would be really helpful. I also think that we have deforestation is such a major problem. If we had a study that spoke to the cattle grazing community and just learnt more about the perceptions of deforestation and biodiversity and what they want to do to turn that around, that would be really helpful. It's a very tense space, you could say, really difficult, and it's very hard to know the best policy approach, basically, because panic clearing is such a major concern. And we've got the federal nature laws that are going to tighten things up now because that's being changed. But we're really worried that there's going to be a massive increase in panic clearing before people start feeling the effects of those laws. Funding in protected areas, I think, as well, would be great to look at how the best parks in the world are managed and how they produce income to support that. That's just a few ideas. I just want to thank you all very much for listening. I'd love to take some questions and have a chat.
Nicky, that was super interesting to hear about that intersection of like conservation, journalism, marketing, and how you're making that work for conservation. Does anyone have questions in the room? I just had a question, which, I mean, you just put up a few issues there, but I was just wondering what your biggest challenge that you sort of come up against. Like, is it a certain set of stakeholders or a certain process with regard to legislation change, or your biggest challenges in terms of making positive change?
Look, I think that there's a few, but probably the one that stands out is that the way that things get politicized, and some parties seem to own conservation policy more than others, and that's really frustrating because everyone benefits from nature conservation. So that's why we're so passionate about this sort of marketing, as you put it, because we really need them to understand, and we need voters to understand that this is actually about everyone and it's something you should vote for.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Nicky, for that. That was a fantastic talk. Really enjoyed it. I was just with your point about the perceptions of the Queensland cattle grazing. Do a little bit of work with producers in Queensland on that sort of stuff, and something that comes up a lot from their end is a lot of the clearing they're doing is of regrowth stuff, and very few of them perceive the value of that regrowth from a biodiversity perspective. And there really needs to be a bit more work done, I guess, the extension and engagement of people to get them excited and understand about what actually starts to move back into that regrowth and its conservation value. And just, it's tricky because of past legislative things, like if people had a threatened species found on their property, they lost some of its management capacity on their PMAB and things like that. But like, you go into a property and you might find greater gliders on there, and they had no idea they were on there, and they find that out, they get super pumped up and excited about it and that sort of thing. But there's so little of that happening at the moment, of actually getting out and putting together a fauna list for a property and getting them to understand that sort of stuff. So I think that that's a really important area to help in that space, I suppose, and get that value of that regrowth forest communicated. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you probably know a lot more. I don't have a lot to add to that. I agree that extension is just so important, and so many of our great nature outcomes in regional areas have been through the collaboration of, well, that's come from the farmers, really, you know, working with catchment management and working with landscape rehabilitation projects. But yeah, I feel the same. Like a lot of people actually know, a lot of farmers seem to know a lot about their property, but don't know how to look for this, you know, the species that are inhabiting it. And when they do find out, it's just can really change their, you know, view of it. But then I guess there's a question of, well, how do you then turn that interest into action? And that's where, you know, you have to have a really strong incentives from government, essentially, whether it's tax breaks or you know, stewardship payments for people that want to actually dedicate regrowth to allow it to recover and keep maintaining it for conservation by establishing nature refuges and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Following on from Brodie, although I do see also there's questions in the chat, but thematically, because obviously, well, I mean, I've learned a lot of this from you, Brodie. I mean, it's not just the regrowth that they don't perceive the biodiversity value of. You know, your stories about just the perceptions that the scrub is, you know, a desert, and actually it's the conversion of the landscapes to open areas with dams that makes the wildlife happen, because you can see the kangaroos and the ducks. And, you know, it's just such a disconnect that I think is so incredibly noticeable in Queensland as someone who comes from Victoria, where I think there's a much more general understanding of what's in the bush amongst primary producers. But it seems that, like, connecting that back up really requires a bit of a de-escalation of the wars between the grazing.
Totally.
And yet conservation groups do keep coming out with these big headlines about, oh, you know, it's the graziers, it's their fault. Like, you started talking about deforestation, but really solutions were all about a different issue, about logging and about protected areas. But this is a very particular issue, because you're talking about private land, and it's like a really complex issue that needs to be sort of broken down into its pieces, and it sort of needs everyone on board to agree to sort of come around the table. How close to that do you think we are?
Well, I mean, I can only talk from my organisation's perspective that we'd love to work on a project that takes what we've done with logging and tries to do the same on private land with farmers, because, like, we only got to the Protect Beautiful Queensland and the work that we've done to really turn around our campaigning from trying it the other way and realising that's just not going to work here. And I probably didn't explain that properly, but, you know, native forest logging, like all this sort of, you know, big campaign group messaging just doesn't work. And I think Queensland has always seen itself as a very different place, possibly should be its own country. They don't like people telling them what to do in different regions. They don't even like people across the hill telling them what to do. So it's going to always have so much more effect if it comes from locals, and if it's said in an authentic way that actually comes from them and resonates with them. So yeah, I think that we could get there, and we could really change the way the conservation movement works. But yeah, we need a strategy, and we need to really involve the farming community. And I think I haven't worked a lot on deforestation, but I know my colleagues that have just found it really difficult, because it's really hard to get access to people in the ag sector, because those battle lines are so deeply drawn, and it's really hard to even get a meeting to kind of talk about, like, how do we do this? Do you guys get that there's a lot of biodiversity in these forests? And they don't really want to have those conversations at the moment. So yeah, very interested to get any insights on what might change that, you know, what that key turning point might be.
I just want to go to the chat really quick, and then I'll come back to the room just to keep building up. So we have a question from April. Hi, Nicky. Thank you. From what I hear, colleagues in Victoria, they aren't impressed with the forestry's treatment of. Oh, well, you're there. Would you like to clarify in person, April?
Hi, Nicky. How you going?
Hello, beautiful. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks so much for your seminar. Oh dear, I'm on the big screen in the room. That's scary. So you and I met in a forest in Victoria. I won't say how long ago, but it was a while ago.
Yep.
People who are still there in East Gippsland tell me it hasn't really, well, maybe it's gotten better, but it's still far from ideal. But from your perspective, do you think they do it better in Victoria and maybe New South Wales and what happens here in forestry in Queensland? Or do you think actually they're all just riddled with issues and lack of commitment to saving the greater gliders as we are?
Oh, I just think that logging in native forest makes no sense. So it's not, I mean, they've allegedly, well, they've committed to ending logging in Queensland, in Victoria's native forests. But what's happening is that whilst the big scale clear felling has ended, there's still heaps of commercial operations in forests that they're doing through bizarre methods like salvage logging that's actually massively degrading, because all the fires down there's all this argument to go in and take all the timber that was burnt, but it doesn't work from a biodiversity perspective. So yeah, I know they have challenges, but I don't forestry didn't do things better down there. They were more industrialized. They were probably a more organized system. They were probably a bit more transparent than here, which I think are all really good leverage points to get improvements here. But ultimately, logging in native forests is an extractive industry. It's mining timber. They're not actually engaged in regeneration or any meaningful form of stewardship of that land. And that's what we see here is just forest logging is degradation. It's not care. It's not management. It's just taking the timber, and we have to get away from that. We have to just work out how to grow the timber if we need it and stop taking what nature's already using. That's very simplistic, but I just think is true.
Thank you.